Hello Year 9, hope everybody's well. I'm just going to go over some answers to the questions in section 2 of the Lord of the Flies reading booklet. Now what I really wanted to do was to not just give the answers, but to talk a little bit around the answers, because that will help to build a bigger picture of the novel, which, as I've said before in other videos, is difficult when you're first trying to get into it. So this is chapter 1 of Lord of the Flies, just answering those questions that are on show my homework. Okay, so how is Ralph first introduced to the story? Well, he's introduced as the boy with fair hair. Okay, so he's not named at the beginning of the story, but we are given some description of him as having fair hair, and there are certain connotations, certain things we associate with fair hair, especially if we've done a lot of reading of old literature where it's conventional to have a heroic or idealised figure as having fair hair, and they're often associated with goodness, or they're an idealised character. That's not always strictly true, it's just a tendency. Okay, and as with all of these things, the ideas I share with you are my interpretation. You don't have to think what your teacher thinks at all, and it's always good to add your own ideas, as long as they are grounded in really robust textual detail. Really significantly, because structure is important in analysing literature, these are the first 5 words of the novel, as you'll know from your own reading. And what Golding does here is he focuses immediately on Ralph. He gives us a visual image rather than just a name. And it establishes Ralph's importance. It focuses our attention on him. So he's introduced as a boy with the fair hair. So straight on to question 2. Why are the boys on the island? So they have crash landed there. They were on a plane that was attacked during a fictional war. Now, I've mentioned this in other videos. It's an atomic war or a nuclear war, a kind of World War III. So World War II is over. We don't even know if World War II has taken place in the novel. And the world is a highly tense place. Now, in reality, this has never happened. It's come close to happening a couple of times, if you know about the Cuban Missile Crisis, or about the standoff between American and Russian forces after World War II in Berlin at a place called Checkpoint Charlie, somewhere I've been many, many times. You'll know that a different kind of missiles were prepared for being used against other countries, but it's never come to that. So you're not to worry that nuclear war or atomic war would break out. But if it had ever broken out, then most of mankind would have been annihilated. It would have had a similar effect to the effects that are in the videos that I shared links with on Show My Homework about the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombings. And certainly it's something that's interested writers such as Neville Shute, who wrote a novel called On the Beach, where everybody in the world is dying because of radiation sickness from a nuclear war. So the boys are on the island because their plane was attacked and they crash landed, and of course the plane has left this huge scar on the island. So mankind has come into this sort of idealised paradise place and damaged it, and then it's rolled into the sea. The plane is rolled into the sea with people on it. What 2 things is Piggy wearing for question 3? Well, he's wearing this windbreaker and thick spectacles. His windbreaker is described as greasy and grubby. So it's this sort of plasticky coat to protect him from rain and wind. And it's described in these 2 words that make him seem unpleasant, as though he's got low standards. And it's a way of setting him apart, kind of, as though he's a sort of lower class than the boys that we come to meet. We sort of start to understand that they're upper class boys, or at least middle class boys, and Piggy clearly isn't. And these are some sort of visual signs that Golding gives us at the beginning of the novel to suggest that he is going to be different from others. The fact that he's wearing a windbreaker on an island that is clearly extremely hot makes him stand out, makes him seem odd and not suited at all to island life. We know it's extremely hot because of the descriptions that Golding gives of Ralph's hair sticking to his face and the boy's sweatiness a bit later on. But also apart from making him stand out, it shows that he's still got this sense of an adult around him, even though there aren't any adults there. He lives with his auntie, as we know, and his auntie would probably tell him to never go out without his coat on, and he's also got it done up as well. So it suggests that he still feels that sort of adult controlling influence, even though he's thousands of miles away from home. His thick spectacles is just another word for glasses, show that he's got very poor eyesight. But these spectacles become symbolic later. They are associated with reason, clarity, vision, the ability to think things through, common sense. These are all things that Piggy demonstrates early on, and a link to this idea that Golding shares with us very early on in the novel, that the only intelligence traceable is that we can link back to Piggy. So when they're electing a leader, Piggy doesn't even get considered, but he's the only one who's actually demonstrated any real intelligence. The fact that they're thick shows the extent of his poor eyesight. So that, again, along with the windbreaker, suggests that he really is an odd fit with the island. He really doesn't belong there and is probably going to struggle to cope there. The spectacles become useful later in lighting the fire, and of course fire is essential for survival. We'll say more about that in another video. Although you should mention Golding got it wrong. The type of glass in Piggy's spectacles couldn't light a fire, but that doesn't matter because Golding has chosen to use it in that way. So Piggy's wearing a windbreaker and thick spectacles. It shows he's a very cautious boy, this windbreaker, and there's lots of language of caution that Golding uses about Piggy. So what's wrong with Piggy? Well, we talked about his eyesight already, and he's asthmatic. He has asthma, which is something we know a lot about these days. Lots of people have asthma these days. But when I was a child, and certainly when the novel was written in 1957, asthma was something that probably not many people knew about. So because it affects his breathing, he's not allowed to run or swim because it's misunderstood. And of course, these days, people with asthma are encouraged to exercise as much as anybody else. And it also suggests, if we go back to this idea of him being overprotected, of him sensing an adult around him, perhaps it's because of his asthma that he's been overprotected by this auntie. But again, it's something that makes him unfortunate, and it's something that makes him stand out as really not being suited to island life. So question 5 is, what has happened to all of the adults? Well, they've disappeared. Ralph speculates that the pilot of the plane must have flown off. Piggy, who is sort of, Ralph considers him to have ill-omened talk, or we're meant to believe that through Golding's words, that he's the sort of the prophet of doom and gloom, suggests that they're dead, that they disappeared into the sea with the plane. And the first question that Piggy asks is, where's the man with the megaphone? So he's clearly very concerned that there are no adults around. And in fact, the word that Golding uses is startled. So he's most worried about there being no adults. That contrasts with Ralph's reaction, which is, wow, I'm free now to act the fool and to play around, which we'll say more about in another video. And Piggy is the one who seems to be, because of the wind cheater, because no running and no swimming, most controlled by adults. And he's the one that moves into the adult role straight away. He starts to worry about what's happened to other people. He takes the children's names as they emerge from the forest. He starts to put a plan together, even though Ralph gets the credit for it and Ralph is elected leader. He is the one who shows compassion. His glasses missed up when he thinks of the children who've gone into the sea with the plane. So when his glasses missed up, it suggests that he's becoming tearful. So he's the one that acts like an adult straight away when all the adults, for whatever reason, have disappeared. 6, what do Ralph and Piggy find in the sand? They find a conch, which is a huge seashell. I'm sure many of you have seen them, and if you haven't, I mean, it's simple to Google a picture of a conch. When I was a child, they were very fashionable to have it in houses in the 1970s, to have one sort of on your mantelpiece or on a shelf, and you would hold them up to your ear, and the people would say, oh, you can hear the sound of the sea, but that was just the way that the shell, because it's sort of an echo chamber in itself really, would echo the sounds, and even if you have this sort of hushing sound in your ear sometimes, which is called susurration, that sound comes back at you if you hold the shell up to your ear. Now the conch becomes very, very useful and symbolic as well in the story. So it's useful because it summons all of the children. A really significant point is that Ralph couldn't get it out of the sand without Piggy, who makes a grab at it, and it's the only time that Piggy seems to demonstrate any sort of swift or slightly aggressive action around the shell. He is said to stroke it, and he treasures and values the shell, the conch. And Ralph wouldn't know how to blow it either. So even though Ralph has got the lungs for it, Piggy obviously couldn't blow it because of his asthma. None of that would be possible without Piggy. And yet Ralph is very dismissive about Piggy's role. Once he sees the shell, he considers Piggy to be an irrelevance in this context. That's how Golding puts it, just paraphrasing his words there. So they find a conch. It becomes hugely symbolic. It's a symbol of authority and power, and it crops up a lot. Whoever's got holding the conch is the person who everyone else should be listened to, until it gets smashed at the end when Piggy's holding it and he's crushed. The shell is crushed as well. So the fact that those two are destroyed at the same time is highly significant. So he's sort of inextricably linked with the conch from the very beginning of the story. Okay. So what job does Piggy take on? Well, he's the one who takes names, which I alluded to earlier. He takes responsibility. He's like he's an authority figure in that sense. It's an act of kindness in a way, because somebody asking you your name is a friendly gesture. It must be reassuring to the children that some kind of organisation is going on, even if they can't think of it in those terms. And it's a bit like doing a fire drill at school, so sort of making sure you know who should be there, so that you can check later on who isn't. And actually, names are significant, and I'll go into names another time. But he takes names, but there's one name we don't know. We just know the name that we just know that there's a boy with a birthmark, a sort of birthmark that stands out, and he's not there after a fire, so we know that he's disappeared. So actually, Piggy taking names is really significant. So 8, so still on names, what is Jack's surname? Well, his name is Merridew. There's lots of things to say about the names that were chosen for particular reasons by Golding in this novel. His surname is Merridew, and for our purposes here, he wants to be known by his surname. Why should I be known as Jack? And he says people knowing each other by their first names, kids' names. He wants to be known as Merridew, which is quite military, quite private school. I mean, his schoolmasters would call him Merridew, and he would expect that. But actually, immediately the response is to call him Jack. Ralph refers to him as Jack, and he's Jack after that. Even though the choir referred to him as Merridew, we just know him as Jack. Number 9, why does Jack believe he should be chief? Well, he's the chapter chorister. That means chapter is just a division, a part of a religion. Chorister is a singer, a choir boy, and he can sing a C sharp. So these two are nonsense reasons, really. Just because you're in a choir and you can sing a C sharp, it doesn't make you suitable to be chief. This is the most relevant, that he is already head boy, and actually we can see that people are used to obeying him. His choir is used to him giving orders and having to do as he says, to the point where they've still got these outrageous uniforms on in this searing heat. And they're like newly washed plums, Golding describes them as, because they're so hot, because they haven't taken their uniform off, because Jack doesn't want them to. So he clearly does have a lot of power over others. He clearly could get things done. We see very early on in the novel that he can get things done. He can make people do what he wants. He's a kind of leader that is feared rather than loved, whereas Ralph is a leader who's sort of loved rather than feared. But that again is for another video. But it's this word chief that's interesting. We know that Ralph has read storybooks about boys' adventures on islands, and he started to transfer that knowledge to life on the island now. And that word chief sort of suggests that he's still playing out that fantasy, because he doesn't say leader or use an alternative word. Chief is that very tribalistic, boys' adventure kind of word. So it's an interesting choice there. Number 10, what does Jack become the leader of? Well, essentially, he's still leader of his choir, so not much has changed, but he decides that they are hunters, and Golding is giving us a strong hint there, along with some of the language that he uses about Jack, such as seized, that Jack's quite an aggressive boy, suited to being a hunter eventually. His first encounter with a pig, when he has the opportunity to get some food for the boys on the island, goes wrong. And that happens at the end of chapter 1, so you will have read that already. But he is a vicious and violent character, although not the most vicious and violent, so it turns out. So he's the leader of the hunters. Immediately he chooses that they're going to be hunters. And there's more to say about that choice, allowing Jack to become the leader of the choir, in another video about Ralph being a good leader. And the final question, what does Simon immediately do when he meets the other boys? Well, he faints. It's so hot that he faints. But Simon faints anyway. Jack tells us that he's fainted in other places and at other times. But what I find most significant about Simon fainting is that then Ralph chooses him to go on the expedition. Whereas you would think that he needs to sort of sit in the cool and rest up for a bit. But, you can argue both sides about that. He's not a good person to take on the expedition, or actually, yeah, he should go on the expedition. Golding needs him to go on the expedition because he needs to plant Simon in our memories early on, and he needs to show us what he's like through his reactions to different things that they see on their expedition. So, I mean, there could have been a lot more to say about each of those answers, but I hope that's helped you to not only say, yes, these are the answers to the questions, but actually now I've got a lot more to think about. If you're struggling with the story, don't worry about it. Remember, all the time we focus on methods. So if you've noticed some language techniques that Golding is using, even if you don't quite get the entire story or what's going on, or you're not sure what to make of a character or a situation, if you're thinking about the tricks, the word tricks or the structure tricks that Golding is using, you're focusing on methods, and that is exactly what you'll be expected to do at GCSE. So that's it for now. I keep trying to make videos and put them up, and I'll continue to do so. So in the meantime, you take care of yourselves.